Hello and welcome to Theme Park History, the channel for everything to do with theme parks, old and new, big and small. In today's episode, we put on our ponchos and mount our noble steed as we explore Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls, a log flume ride that opened at Universal's Islands of Adventure on May 28, 1999. This attraction was suggested by all these mounties.
Because the Mountie always gets his man!
So thank you to everyone for the comments. As always, if there's an attraction you would like us to cover in a future video, leave a comment down below. You never know, your suggestion might be next month's video. Inspired by the Dudley Do-Right characters created by Jay Ward and Alex Anderson. No, not the terrible live-action movie, the cartoon everybody remembers. That's more like it. The attraction places guests in the middle of a wacky and wild adventure straight out of the animated series. Described by Universal as an aqua coaster, the attraction is part roller coaster and part water flume, combining its unique ride system with tons of visual jokes and funny puns the series was known for, along with the 75-foot finale drop. Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls sends guests on the biggest splash of their lives, making sure they're soaked to the bone.
And now...
Hey, Rocky! Watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat!
But that trick never worked!
This time for sure! Presto! Well, I'm getting close.
And now it's time for another special feature.
Before we find out how Dudley Do-Right decided to settle down and make his home at Islands of Adventure, we need to talk about the man that was somewhat responsible for the Canadian Mountie, Jay Ward. In 1947, Ward was approached by his childhood friend and animator Alex Anderson to help create the company Television Arts Productions. The duo would pitch an animated series to the NBC television network known as the Comic Strips of Television, which featured animated shorts of Crusader Rabbit, Ham Hock Bones, a parody of Sherlock Holmes, and the first appearance of Dudley Do-Right, a bumbling Canadian Mountie. While NBC wasn't impressed with Bones or Do-Right, the network would pick up Crusader Rabbit as its own syndicated series, airing for 2 seasons from 1950 to 1952. After losing the rights to the Crusader Rabbit character in a legal fight in 1956, Ward and Anderson began work on an animated series idea they didn't pitch to the network, the Frostbite Falls Review. The animated show would feature a group of forest animals running a television station, including Rocket J. Squirrel and Canadian Moose. Seriously, that's the name they gave him, Canadian Moose, I'm not making this up. While the show never got past the planning stages, Ward would take the concept and turn it into his most famous creation, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends.
Starring that supersonic speedster, Rocket J. Squirrel, with his pal Bullwinkle the Moose, and a host of others.
Hurry, Bullwinkle! The show's about to start!
I'm coming as fast as I can.
Wave to the people!
The show, which originally aired from November 19, 1959 to June 27, 1964, was an animated variety show with the main feature being Rocky the Flying Squirrel and Bullwinkle the Moose foiling the plans of 2 Russian spies, Boris and Natasha. Other segments from the show were Dudley Do-Right of the Mounties, a parody of old-time melodramas, Peabody's Improbable History, which was a dog named Mr. Peabody and his boy Sherman traveling through time, and Fractured Fairy Tales, which were classic fairy tales retold in a comedic fashion. Even though it only aired for 5 seasons, the series would stay on television for over 40 years, due in part to its syndicated rerun on such channels as Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Boomerang. The show is considered by many to be one of the best animated television series of all time, due in part to the quality writing and dry humor, mixing puns, cultural and topical satire, along with self-referential humor, making it the first animated series to appeal to both children and adults. After the passing of Jay Ward in 1989, Disney would acquire the distribution rights that allowed Buena Vista Entertainment to sell Rocky and Bullwinkle on VHS in 1990, marking the first time the show was available on home video. Following the success of home video sales and a renewed interest in the show, Universal would acquire the worldwide merchandising and theme park rights in 1991, which would bring characters from the show, including Rocky, Bullwinkle, and Dudley Do-Right, to Florida and Hollywood. Universal was chosen over Disney and Time Warner as Jay's widow, Ramona, felt Universal would give the characters much more exposure than the other two companies could. Rocky and Bullwinkle would make their theme park debut with The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle Show, a 16-minute live stage show that opened at Universal Studios Florida and Hollywood during the summer of 1992. While the show was somewhat of a success when it opened, Universal had much bigger plans for Rocky and Bullwinkle, as the duo, along with Dudley Do-Right, would be a focal point of Universal's second theme park in Florida, Cartoon World. While plans for Cartoon World would eventually fall apart and evolve into Islands of Adventure, Universal would still dedicate part of the new park to cartoons, known as Toon Lagoon. The area is based on the cartoon characters of King Features Syndicate and Jay Ward, due in part to Universal already acquiring the rights when developing and planning Cartoon World. Even in the early stages of planning and development of Cartoon World, Universal Creative had plans to create a log flume ride using the characters of Dudley Do-Right, as the attraction was a must-have since there were no attractions at Universal Studios Florida that let guests get wet. The exterior of the attraction was originally made to look like a Canadian sawmill, but was later changed to the mountains of Yukon because it was too similar to the exterior of Disney's Splash Mountain. While it resembles a log flume, Universal describes the attraction as an aqua coaster, as even though the logs float, whenever they reach a rise, drop, or curve, the log engages the rails, somewhat becoming a roller coaster. The ride track and boats were created by MacLeod, and the attraction uses over 400,000 gallons of water. The final drop of the attraction sends guests down a 45-degree, 75-foot drop at speeds up to 45 miles per hour. The angle of the drop would be changed to 50 degrees in 2004 after guest complaints of how rough the drop was. The original concept for the finale of the attraction would have been Snidely Whiplash lowering a saw blade in front of the 10-passenger log and splitting it right down the middle, creating two separate logs going down the final drop. At the end of the ride, the separated logs would unload at two different stations, and then secretly reattach before returning to the loading area. This concept made it far into development, as seen by the two separate tracks before the finale drop, as well as the two separate unloading docks. During the final drop, the log plunges underneath a shack full of explosives. As the log passes by, the shack is blown into several pieces before falling back into place ahead of the next log that passes by. In order to pull off this effect, each of the shack's exterior walls are split into several different pieces that hinge together in opposing corners. Pneumatics that are installed inside the shack move these pieces up and down during the explosion and reset afterwards. The attraction was originally set to open sometime during the summer of 2000, but because of budget cuts made to the finale, Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls would officially open with Islands of Adventure on May 28, 1999. Located within Toon Lagoon at Universal's Islands of Adventure, guests first encounter the attraction by seeing its own version of Mount Rushmore, with the faces of Dudley, Horse, Nell, and Inspector Fenwick on the mountain. As guests make their way through the queue, they pass by several locations, including Snidely Whiplash's hideout and a playhouse where Dudley, Horse, and Nell are performing at. While passing through the playhouse, guests see Nell kidnapped from her dressing room by Whiplash, setting up the story for the attraction. Guests reach the end of the queue and into the loading area, where they board their 5-passenger log. Once guests have boarded the log, it enters the first room where forest animals play instruments, a parody of Splash Mountain. The log ascends up the first lift, where guests see Dudley riding Horse backward up the slope, along with Snidely riding a minecart, laughing at his accomplishment of kidnapping Nell. The log then heads outside, where Whiplash attempts to drop a boulder onto the guests, a parody of Snow White's Scary Adventures where the evil queen tries to do the same thing. Guests evade being crushed and enter Won't Ya Be Mine. Inside the mine, Dudley tells Horse he can't see anything before being attacked by a large bear that's behind him. Back outside, guests see Whiplash doing what he does best, tying Nell to train tracks. Guests also pass by Horse and Inspector Fenwick, who are also tied to the tracks. Now inside a cave, Dudley says, "Horse, it seems that I've lost my train of thought." Suddenly a train appears, heading straight towards the guests, which is a parody of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. At the last moment, guests are able to avoid the train when the log drops. The log then enters into an outdoor sawmill where Nell can be seen tied to a log that's headed for a buzzsaw, while Whiplash and Dudley fight over the lever that operates the conveyor. After another drop, guests see signs telling them to turn around, as danger is not too far away. The log then ascends another lift hill and and into Whiplash's lair. Inside the lair, Dudley and Whiplash have a shootout and eventually Nell is freed, firing Whiplash from a cannon. With Nell saved and Whiplash captured, Dudley accidentally puts his foot on a detonator while celebrating, causing a huge explosion and sending guests down the ride's final drop. Guests plummet down 75 feet at 45 miles per hour into a dynamite shack. While the log is under the shack explodes, spraying guests with water. After surviving the final drop, the ride still has one more surprise for guests, as they pass by 9 hoses on their right. For a small fee, guests not on the attraction can spray the riders with water from the hoses. The log enters the Alata-Poo-Poo Island prison, where Whiplash is being held. Whiplash attempts to convince a beaver holding the key to his cell in its mouth to give it to him, a parody of the Pirates of the Caribbean. The log passes through the final scene, where Dudley is being awarded a medal by Inspector Fenwick for capturing Whiplash and saving his daughter Nell, while Nell kisses Horse. The ride concludes with the narrator saying, "And so our hero proves that a Mountie always gets his man, but not always his girl." Guests return to the loading area, unboard from their log, and exit the attraction. Nearby, there is a booth where guests can purchase their on-ride photo, and for a small fee can use a human-sized dryer machine to help dry off if it isn't a hot, sunny day in Orlando, Florida. The 5.5-minute attraction has been well received with guests, as many have praised the attraction's ride system, along with the story's numerous puns and parodies of classic Disney attractions. It could be said that in some way that Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls is to Universal Orlando as Splash Mountain is to Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. A log flume ride that is one of the most thrilling and intense experiences guests can have while visiting either of the parks, guaranteed to leave them drenched from head to toe.
Our other big story tonight, a massive fire at a Florida theme park. A ride at Universal Studios Islands of Adventure had to be evacuated after a fire broke out there.
At 5 p.m. on January 1st, 2011, part of the roof of Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls would catch fire. The fire, which sent flames and thick black smoke into the sky, forced the evacuation of the attraction and the Toon Lagoon area. The Orlando Fire Department quickly arrived and was able to put out the fire within the hour. Even though there were guests on the ride and waiting in the queue, everyone was evacuated safely and without requiring any hospital treatment. Toon Lagoon would remain closed for an hour and a half until Orlando FD gave the all-clear for guests to re-enter the area, and the attraction would be closed indefinitely while the cause of the fire was established. While investigators were unable to determine the cause of the fire due to the extensive damage that was done to the building, it's believed an electrical problem from an air conditioner unit or ride controller may have been the source of the incident. Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls would remain closed, and its scheduled refurbishment was pushed forward immediately. The attraction would officially reopen on March 14, 2011, with all the special effects restored and the entire ride repainted. Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls is the perfect example of Universal Creative taking a traditional theme park ride and turning it into one of the most popular attractions at Islands of Adventure. Full of visual gags and puns, the attraction combines the fun of the classic cartoon with a thrilling finale that leaves guests either wishing they never went on in the first place or can't wait to go on again. When it comes to Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls, there are 2 guarantees. You're going to regret not buying that poncho, and the Mountie always gets his man. So that is the theme park history of Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls. As always, thank you for watching the video and supporting the channel. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel. If there's any attraction you would like us to cover in a future video, leave a comment down below. Once again, thank you for watching, and until next time, remember that Canadian bacon is basically just ham.
What's going on out here? What's wrong?
We've all just lost our homes and businesses.
Yeah. Well, that's a relief.
Huh?
It is?
Yes. I thought that this was about the vampires.
No! This is about that bloodsucker Snidely Whiplash. He's taken everything. Our homes, our businesses, our farms.
Yeah. What do you mean vampires?
You mean you don't know? No. The woods are filled with them.
What?